You ever see a flight price and just do a double take? I mean, how is it possible you can fly hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles for less than you'd spend on a decent dinner out? It just doesn't seem to make any sense. Well, let's get into it, because the story behind those impossibly cheap flights is an absolute masterclass in ruthless efficiency, clever strategy, and totally rewriting the rules of an entire industry.
Right? This is the question we all ask. Are the airlines just bleeding money on these seats? Is it some kind of magic trick? Well, the answer is no, not at all. It's actually a very deliberate and kind of brilliant business model that has completely changed how all of us travel. And what's wild is that this isn't some new thing. If you look at this graph, you can see that for more than 60 years, the actual cost of getting on a plane has been going down and down and down. You can see these huge drops, right? One in the 60s, that was all about better jet technology. And then another one after the late 70s when deregulation just opened the floodgates for way more competition. This is what set the stage for a complete revolution.
And that whole revolution, it was basically kicked off by one single airline in the US that just decided to do things completely differently. They looked at how traditional airlines worked, and then they just tore up the rule book.
That airline was Southwest. They launched back in '71 with this super simple, no-frills idea. But when the government deregulated the industry in 1978, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. The whole model just exploded. It spread to Europe in the 90s with airlines like Ryanair, and now these low-cost carriers, or LCCs, they're a massive global force.
And this quote from Herb Kelleher, one of Southwest's founders, just nails their whole philosophy. It wasn't about fancy meals or champagne in the sky. Nope, it was about one thing and one thing only: getting you from point A to point B on time for the cheapest price possible. It's so simple, but it was incredibly powerful.
So how in the world do they pull it off? Seriously, how do you make money on a $20 ticket? Well, it all comes down to this relentless, almost obsessive focus on cutting costs out of every single part of the operation. Their playbook basically has three key strategies.
All right, first up, the airplanes themselves. You know, an airline's fleet is a huge expense, so the low-cost guys found some pretty ingenious ways to turn it into a massive cost saver. The key here is just one word: simplification. Most of these LCCs fly only one type of plane. Think about that for a sec. That means your pilots, your flight attendants, your mechanics, they only need to be trained on one system. You only need to stock parts for one kind of plane. It's just insanely efficient. Then, they cram more seats into each plane to get that cost per passenger down, and they keep their fleet of planes really young, because newer planes burn way less fuel and don't break down as often.
Okay, strategy number 2 is all about where they fly. You might think an airport is an airport, but for a low-cost carrier, that choice is a massive financial decision.
LCCs will often skip the big, flashy international hubs that charge a fortune in landing fees. Instead, they fly into these smaller, secondary airports where it's cheaper and less crowded. This also lets them do these lightning-fast turnarounds. We're talking as little as 25 minutes from landing to taking off again. Why? Simple. A plane sitting on the ground isn't making any money. And finally, they fly point to point. No complicated hubs, no baggage transfers, just simple, direct flights. Now for the third and final piece of this whole cost-cutting puzzle, the day-to-day stuff, from the flight crews to the service on board.
And this is where it really all comes together. LCCs are masters of utilization. They keep their planes up in the air for maybe 12 hours a day, while a traditional airline might only fly theirs for 8. They run with smaller, super-efficient crews to keep those labor costs down. And then, of course, the part everyone knows, the no-frills service. That free bag or drink you get on a big airline, yeah, that's not free. It's just baked into your ticket price. The LCCs just strip all of that out.
And this chart just shows you the result perfectly. On the left, a typical full-service airline. On the right, a low-cost carrier. Just look at the differences. See the aircraft costs? Way lower for the LCC. And the crew costs? Again, much lower. So when you add it all up, that final cost per seat down at the bottom, it's nearly half. That is how you get a cheap ticket.
But here's the thing. That super low fare isn't the whole story. In fact, that low price is just the beginning. It's kind of like the bait. The real money, that's made after you've already clicked buy.
The magic phrase here is ancillary revenue. This is all the money they make from everything that isn't the ticket itself. The whole LCC model is built on this idea of unbundling. They take a traditional ticket, break it down into all its little pieces, and then sell every single one of those pieces back to you.
And I am sure this list looks very, very familiar. Want to check a bag? That'll be a fee. Want to bring a normal-sized carry-on? Fee.
Want to pick your own seat? That's a fee. Board the plane first? Yep, another fee. This whole art of the add-on is where these airlines make a massive chunk of their profit. They lure you in with a great low price, and then they make their real money on all the extras.
The LCC model has been so ridiculously successful, so disruptive, that it's forced every other airline out there to completely change how they do business. That clean line that used to separate low cost from full service, it's getting really, really blurry.
So what we're seeing now is this great airline mashup. The LCCs are starting to add things like business class and connecting flights to try and grab those customers who are willing to pay more. And at the exact same time, the big full-service carriers are copying the LCC playbook. They're rolling out basic economy fares and charging for checked bags. Everybody is sort of meeting in the middle.
So let's just recap the formula that gets you that impossibly cheap flight. You start with a bare-bones, rock-bottom product. You ruthlessly cut every single penny of unnecessary costs out of your operations. You keep your planes full and flying constantly. And then you make your real profit from all those optional add-ons.
And that brings us to the big question looking forward. As all these airlines start to look and act more and more alike, who's the real winner here? Is it us, the passengers, because we get more choices? Or is it the airlines, because we're just ending up with fewer perks and more fees no matter who we fly with? It's definitely something to think about next time you're booking a flight.